Read these three words with me.
In, then, through.
Doesn't mean much, does it? Three words, right? Maybe we need to read it faster.
In, then, through.
Better?
Yes.
Slower? No perspective, no nothing, right? Now, one little bar, one little comma. Now how do you read it?
In, then, through.
Start making a little more sense? Not yet. In, then through. It will, hopefully. When I'm done by 10:30 or so. Should be making more sense to you by then. In, then through. Something's inside you, and then it's through you. Years ago, when I was your age, even older than you, I always believed there was a God. But I don't know that I really believed in God. I want everybody in here to believe in God. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what that means. I think that God wants to work through us to reach other people. I think that's one of the big reasons we're here for, is to reach out to others. But I also believe that before we can do that, we've got to let Him in. We've got to let Him in our hearts. He can't work through us until He gets in us. We can't reach out to others with faith, with trust, with hope, with grace, until He gets in us. I think people learn a lot of times three ways. I think they learn through stories. I think they learn through experience. And I don't think they learn through different situations by studying up and talking about and learning about and listening to other people. So I'm going to tell you some stories. And think about these three words. Think about God getting in you and working through you as I talk about some of these people. So there was a guy, lived in the Depression. His name was Walter. Walter Ford was his name. Had a wife, had 4 kids, almost 100 years ago. Lived in southern Missouri, middle of the Depression, had no money, had nothing. Nothing. He was farming. He finally got to the point where he had to sell everything. He had a sale. We found an old sale bill of Walter DeBoer's. The actual sale bill and the actual paperwork that showed what he sold things for. He sold forks for $0.10. He sold bowls for 20 cents. He sold a cow for $100. He sold a tractor for $25. He didn't have any money. Nobody else had any money. He had nothing. He sold basically everything he had, and he moved to Columbia, Missouri with his wife and 4 kids. He lived on a farm. He was a farmer. He was a proud man, and he couldn't make it farming. Sold everything, paid off his bills, took a little bit of money that he had left, and moved to Columbia to live in an apartment. When he had lived half his life, his entire life, as a farmer. So he gets to Columbia, got no money, got no job, lives in a tiny apartment, has a wife, has 4 kids to feed, doesn't know what to do, doesn't know how to make any money. He finds a bunch of scrap wood laying around in the alley behind this apartment. Odds and ends, finds enough materials, and he builds himself a little wagon. Scrap wood, probably found some old wheels. His wife made sandwiches. And he took off through the campus at the University of Missouri with a wagon full of sandwiches, and he started selling them. He sold sandwiches. Every day, he'd load up his wagon, his wife would make sandwiches, he'd load it up. This was a guy that had been a farmer his whole life. He was a family. He wasn't used to selling sandwiches. And he got in this habit. We found this out because we found an old newspaper article in the Columbia Tribune, and there was an article in there about it. He started going down the row. This makes sense, doesn't it? He started going down the row where all the fraternities and the sororities were. They're always hungry. And he sold sandwiches every day, every day, every day, every day. His son went with him. His son's name was Leonard. And Leonard was in high school at the time. And he started helping. And they sold sandwiches. And they made a living. They started calling him Dad, all the college students, because he'd go through every day selling sandwiches. Called him Dad DeBoer. And he made a living like that. Leonard DeBoer was his son, finished high school, went to college at MU, got an agriculture degree, played football at MU. I don't think he played very much. What was that movie a long time ago about the kid at Notre Dame that got in like the last game? Rudy. You guys have never seen this, some of you old
Rudy.
wiser people. Rudy. I think he was kind of the Rudy of University of Missouri. I think he got to play a game or two. Leonard DeBoer graduated with a degree in agriculture, was able to buy a job, was able to buy a farm in central Missouri, started a family, got married, started a family, had 3 kids. One of those kids was my mom. Walter was my great-grandpa, Leonard was my grandpa. One of the 3 kids was my mom. Isn't it crazy how you start out, don't know where you came from, don't know what kind of legacy people are going to leave. I can guarantee you that when Walter DeBoer was walking through University of Missouri campus, he never thought that his great-grandson was going to be talking about him 100 years later. We never know where we're going to get inspiration from. We never know where we're going to get perspective from. We never know what kind of legacy that we're going to leave. What's a couple of things that I've learned from him? Never give up. He was a Christian. We also read that in the paper. So was my grandma and grandpa. They went to church. They believed in God. They had faith. I can guarantee you that there was a lot of prayer said that God worked in him before it worked through him. I can guarantee you that he did a little bit of preaching when he was walking through the sororities and the fraternity houses. How's God working in you before it works through you? God worked on their hearts. And in turn, what did they do? They reached out. They reached out to others. They reached out to college kids. They used a bad situation, no money, broke, no job, no house, and turned it into a lifestyle, turned it into a living, and he reached out to people. In Psalm 78, it says, "For he issued his laws to Jacob, he gave his instructions to Israel, he commanded our ancestors to teach them to their children, so the next generation might know him, even the children not yet born. And they in turn will teach their own children." We can learn through experiences, we can learn from other people. So, my grandpa, he was a farmer. This Leonard that I talked about that played football at MU, a game or two. I spent a lot of time in his house. I love being outside with him. I learned how to drive a tractor. I learned how to feed cows. I learned how to haul hay. I learned how to fish in their pond. I learned how to ride horses, anything else that you do on a farm. I walked around with him and asked him questions, and we talked about everything. We'd go to the local grocery store. The grocery store back then, when I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, didn't like it is now. We didn't go to Walmart. It wasn't a Walmart. We went to a little store that was maybe the size of this room, maybe. He'd go in, buy milk and bread, eggs, and the things that he needed. But what I remember is they had about this big, about this wide. They had a drink cooler, full pop, full of ice, full pop. You open the lid from the top, you reach down in there and get a bottle of pop, and there's a bottle opener on the front of it. I think it cost 10 cents. Grandpa would buy me a bottle of pop. We'd go in Mr. Wiley's store. Mr. Wiley, that was his name for real. Take that pop bottle out of there and open it on the front. Best bottle of pop I'd ever had 50 years ago. Probably until this day. Here's what our day would look like. He worked hard. He farmed hard. But he took lots of breaks. We get up, I'd go stay at his house, and we'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Have to go out and feed cows. And we'd come in, my grandpa would have breakfast ready. We'd always have eggs and bacon and toast, a glass of milk. We'd have breakfast. Go back out, and we'd work till about 10 o'clock. We'd come back in for a break. We'd have a roll, he'd have a cup of coffee, I'd have a glass of milk. We'd listen to the farm report. We'd see what the price of hogs were, what the price of cattle was. That's pretty interesting to a 10-year-old, you know, when we'd listen to the radio every morning. We'd go out and work some more, we'd have something else to do, and we'd come back in for lunch. Same thing would happen over again. Then we'd come back in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Then we'd have a bottle, I'd get one of those bottle pops, and my grandma was a Pringles lover. She had Pringles cans. They had Pringles back then. We had Pringles cans sitting all over the house. That's what we had for our snack. And every day was like that. But I also learned a lot from it. I remember how he'd take me out. I learned how to rake hay with an old-fashioned rake hook behind the tractor. I learned how to haul hay. I learned how to stack hay so it didn't fall down. You know, when you stack hay bales, you stack one hay bale, and then you stack the next one, and then you stack another one in between them to tie them together. Scoot them away from the wall a little bit, and then every time you build them up a little bit higher, they'd get a little bit closer to the wall. That way they'll lean against the wall. How many of you don't even know what a small hay bale is? Because all we see is big round ones now, right? They're about that big, about that wide, probably weigh about 75 pounds, maybe.
You gotta work local home with a bigger hands?
Yes. Now, I remember this 50 years ago like it was yesterday. All this stuff that we did. We'd go out in the mornings, they'd be like bins that we'd have to throw grain in to feed the cattle, and they'd be lined up there about 10 feet long, lined up like that. And I know Grandpa used to like having me there because he'd get up on the, I don't know how he did it when I wasn't there, but he'd drive the tractor, and he'd have me stand in the wagon and hook to the tractor full of corn. And I'd be the one to throw all the corn. He'd drive along next to those feeders, and I'd be the one to throw all the corn into the feeders for him. And I learned that if you take a big scoop shovel full, about like a snow shovel, take a big scoop shovel full of grain, and if you just kind of throw it like that, you get about half of it on the ground. Take a scoop, and you throw it, and you go like that, and all that grain will just go up just like the shape of a shell and just fall right straight into the bin, or into the feeder. What in the world does all this have to do with God? What's it have to do with this? You know what he taught me to do with all this work and all this talk and all this stuff that we did? He taught me, even without saying it, he taught me to open my heart. Maybe to him, maybe to my parents, maybe to my grandparents, maybe my friends, but to God. Let God in. Let him be a part of your life. Because once you let him in, once you open your heart, and once you run your day based on God, and based on his will, and based on what he can do for you, you'll begin to do this. You will let him work through you. And you won't even think about it. And you'll be doing just like my grandpa did. You'll be doing stuff for good people all the time. God, once God gets in you, he's going to work through you. Open your heart and let him in. Remember I told you he had 3 kids. One of them was my mom. One of them was his name was Bob. We called him Bobby. He lived out on the farm and helped farm too. He'd been to school, he went to college, he'd been to Vietnam. He fought the Vietnam War for, I think he was over there for 2 years, came back. They raised cattle. They had about 100 cows, and they had calves. They'd always have calves in the wintertime, and I never understood that. Why would you want a cow to have a bunch of baby calves in the middle of the winter when it was cold? I never understood. I finally asked him one day, and the reason he did it was, he said, there isn't any flies then, there isn't any mud then, everything's frozen, everything's dead. I said, it works great. You know what he would do? When they were calving, did you know that calves they're not just born between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m.? Sometimes they're born in the middle of the night. Sometimes they're born at odd hours. Sometimes they're born not very healthy. He'd get up in the middle of the night in an old beat-up pickup and drive out in his pasture and drive around and check all the cows every night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Every night. Didn't matter if it was cold or snowy or anything. Every once in a while, he'd find one that was having trouble. And the little baby calf and the cow weren't getting along, wasn't getting milk, whatever it was. He'd pick that calf up and bring it into the house and run some warm water in the bathtub and bring that little calf in there and give him a nice warm bath. How many times do we do something for people when it's easy and it's convenient and it's in the middle of the day and it's when the sun is shining and it's when I don't have anything else to do? How many times do we think God's working through us during those conditions? How many times is God working through us in the middle of the night when it's cold and when we're tired and it's inconvenient? Like when Bobby would take care of those calves. So I learned a little bit about cows, and I learned a little bit about calves, and I learned a little bit about raising them. But what I learned from him was there's got to be something that makes you do this. There's got to be something letting God in that makes you do things for others. Can't let it go by without telling you about my grandma. My grandma was one of the most patient, nicest, friendliest people. She was a little goofy, too. She was kind of silly. She was a farm wife, but she wouldn't set foot on a tractor. She wouldn't ride a horse, she wouldn't help with cattle, but she was a farmer. She took me to church when I stayed with her. She played the organ every Sunday. Faith was important to her. She didn't talk a lot about it. Grandpa didn't talk a lot about it. Faith's kind of funny. It's easy to have faith when things are good. Have faith when things are convenient. Have faith when things are easy. When we have faith in something that is what we like. The real test is that you have faith when things are going to have faith when it's not what we want, when it's hard for us, when it hurts? Can you continue to have faith when everything's wrong? Can you trust that God is going to be with you and that God is taking care of you when you can't see any light at the end of the tunnel? Can you keep letting God in and letting Him work through you and letting Him change things with you and the things around you, even when it's not going right? I think God's kind of like a grandpa. Grandpas do tell their grandkids no sometimes. And they keep them from doing things to keep them safe, to keep them healthy, to keep them growing upright, to keep them thinking about the right things. Isn't that kind of what God does too? You ever understand everything that's going on around you? Little 5-year-old kids don't understand everything that's going on around them either. But they trust their grandparents. We don't understand everything that's going on around us. Can't we be like a grandkid and trust that God's got it? Keep Him in us. Don't push Him out when things are bad. I think we got some people in here that like horses, right? Used to ride horses. Grandpa raised what are called Tennessee walking horses. He never showed them. He never won any ribbons or any awards or anything like that. But he raised them and had several. We used to ride horses. We used to go to the state fair and watch horses. You talk about this exciting night for a 10-year-old. We would go in, it's called a big coliseum at the state fairgrounds, no air conditioning. It was just open, had a roof on it, but it was open. Horses would go in there and walk around in circles. The judges, and it was dirty. The floor was dirty and there was dust everywhere. Great big old fans blowing. Like 100 degrees in there. Grandpa would always go up to the top and say, man, it's hot. When we watch these horses, these walking horses, they pick their feet up real high. You seen those? They kind of prance when they walk. I think everybody in Missouri had one, and they all went up there and showed them on the night we were there. So they put 8 or 10 of them out there, and they'd go around about 10 times. The judges would watch them, and people would watch them, and they'd come by, and all the people would clap. Grandpa would go, which one's going to win? So I'd pick one out. I never got one right. I had no idea what to look for. He had horses. Friends had come over to our house, to his house on a Sunday afternoon, and we'd go, honest to goodness, we'd go on trail rides. They'd bring them over, they'd unload them out of the trailers, we'd all get on horses, and I had a horse, one of Grandpa's horses. Her name was Annie. And she was about 20 years old. That's pretty old for a horse. But it was tall, and I rode it as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, just like all the adults. And I thought I was pretty hot stuff. Annie wouldn't run past about that fast if her life depended on it. She'd look like some of us old counselors out trying to run. But I thought I was something else. Until, did you know horses can figure out, you can ride and barely get them to move and they act tired? And I thought Annie was going to die a few times if we were going out on these trail runs. You know what happens when you turn around and start back home? They know. And I don't know how they know. You can turn a half dozen corners, go all kinds of different directions. And when you turn home, all of a sudden Annie is like 5 years old again, because she will take off. And if you're not hanging on and ready, because she's going to the barn. Did you know that you think, if you've never really ridden a horse before, you think you got to hold on, right? And you do. Maybe the reins, hold on to the reins. Well, you've also got to keep your feet in the stirrups. because you hold on with your legs almost more than you hold on to your hands. You know what happens when a horse is running and you're 10 years old and your arms are going like this with the reins and your feet come out in the stirrups and all of a sudden your legs start going like this and your arms are going like this. And I can tell Annie to stop 100 times and she's not stopping until she gets back and gets her forward in the barn. One time I didn't get home the same time she did. What's having to do with God? Notice we all have a lot of life experiences. Older people have a lot more stories than younger people sometimes. We've all got life experiences. But what do we get out of that? Do we just live our lives and just go on and this day and the next day and the next day and the next day and we just keep going? Is that what God wants from us? Just to go through and do stuff every day? Maybe we talk to Him, maybe we ask Him for something when we need it. Or maybe we ask Him for something when things are bad, and if everything's going all right, we just kind of keep going. Kind of like Annie. If we're going away from the house and we're grumpy and this isn't what we want to do, and Annie was tired and her legs were probably sore, and then we turn her around and we head for the house and we get something we like, we get something we want to do, we get something we want to go to, and then all of a sudden we're excited. Well, God wants us to open our hearts and let Him in all the time, every day. Even if we're headed away from the house and we don't like it. Because He wants to work through us. He can't do that until we let Him in. All right, one more story. One of the things we do on horses is, I talk about the trail rides, we'd also drive cattle. This was before four-wheelers. They didn't have four-wheelers back then. So when you drove cattle, it looked like just like on TV. You ever watch those old westerns? Parents ever make you watch the old John Wayne westerns or something when they're doing cattle drives? Well, when you're 10 years old and Grandpa says, all right, we're going to saddle up the horses this morning and we're going to move cattle from this field to this field. I was picturing what was on TV. That's not quite how it worked. But we did drive cattle, kind of. But I thought it was pretty hot stuff. Did you know cows? You could have 100 cows together, and they will all go right up to like a creek that they have to cross. It might be that deep, and it might be that wide. That first couple of cows will walk right up to that water and stop. And you know what the other 98 will do? Walk right up behind them and stop. As soon as you can get that first one to go across, one cow take off, you know what the rest of them all do? They get in the line and they'll follow. And they'll just go, and they'll go, and they'll go, and they'll go. Same thing going through a gate. You can't get them to go through, you can't get them to go through, and all of a sudden one goes through and then they all go. One right after another after another. Does that ever sound familiar in our lives? People follow each other just like calves sometimes. I don't even know where they're going. Does that ever happen with people? You ever follow somebody just because, well, he's going over there, I guess I'll go too. You just follow. Kind of goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago, that just today and tomorrow and the next day and then the next day, and we just kind of coast along. Let God in your heart. Let Him give you some direction. Let Him show you. Matthew 7, it says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Are you following the right people? You going through the broad gate or the narrow gate? Who are you following? Who or what are you letting into your heart? What's God working on in your heart today? What difficult things are you going through? Are you giving up? Are you dealing with it? Or are you letting Him in? Are you following Him? How do you let Him in? How do you let God in? You pray. You read the Bible. Look at who you're following. Who are you listening to? Who are you paying attention to? What kind of places are you going to? And you pray. And you build a relationship. And you say, God, I'm letting you in. I'm going to do what you want. I'm going to follow what you say. I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to find out what you're telling me. I'm going to watch when you put things in front of me in a day. I'm going to pay attention who you put in front of me, and I'm going to follow the people that Bible supports. And pretty soon, God's going to start coming out, and people are going to see it. And people are going to know if you can walk down the street, and they're going to know you're a Christian. They're going to know God is inside you. They'll be able to tell. Because God's going to use you. My great-grandpa, my grandpa, my mother, me, my kids, my grandkids, I know of at least 6 generations. God's going to use all of us. We're all going to learn from each other. We're all going to open our hearts. And we're going to reach people. You guys are going to reach people. You guys are going to make a difference in people, and you have no idea who they are. In fact, it's already happening. Don't you let God in. Do you know what prayer Jesus used to teach the disciples how to pray? Teach people how to pray? Lord's Prayer.